The following video contains detailed accounts of real-life violence, sexual assault, and murder. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Canada was once known as a country where doors were left unlocked and children played outside until dusk, their laughter echoing through peaceful neighborhoods. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, all of that changed. Evil came to Ontario not in the form of a shadowy stranger, but as a beautiful young couple who hid their darkest secrets behind dazzling smiles. Their names were Bernardo and Karla Homolka. Bernardo was born in Scarborough, Ontario, in 1964. From a distance, he was the picture of a Canadian boy, charming, smart, ambitious. But his childhood was poisoned by violence. His father was a predator, his mother broken and withdrawn, the house always full of tension and secrets. By his teens, Paul was already fascinated by domination and humiliation. Girls from school remember how he could switch from polite to cruel without warning, how his stare made them uneasy, how he always wanted to be in control. Karla Homolka, born 6 years later in 1970, was the pride of her family. She was the eldest of 3 sisters, a high achiever, and loved by her friends and teachers. People thought she would be a veterinarian, a mother, a model citizen. But even as a child, there were dark hints. Stories of Karla bullying her sisters, a fascination with death, a strange enjoyment of risky games that made others nervous. When Paul and Karla met at a pet convention in 1987, it was an instant, electric attraction. He was 23, handsome with a magnetic confidence. She was 17, impressionable and eager to please. That first night, they stayed up talking until morning, and by the end of the weekend, they were a couple. But what looked like love was quickly revealed as obsession. Paul was demanding, jealous, and controlling. Karla gave in to his every wish. What neither set of parents knew was that Paul's fantasies had turned violent. At night, he prowled the streets of Scarborough. He watched young women step off city buses, followed them into the darkness, and attacked. His assaults were brutal and coldly calculated. Over 3 years, more than a dozen women were raped. The police released sketches. Women walked in pairs, but the attacks continued. One survivor, who later bravely spoke out, described her terror. "He grabbed me from behind. I tried to scream, but he covered my mouth and told me if I screamed, he'd kill me. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I thought, this is where I die." But she survived. Others did too, living with scars that never healed, struggling to trust again. Paul's friends joked that he looked just like the sketch in the newspapers. He laughed with them. When police finally questioned him, he charmed his way out, leaving detectives frustrated but unable to prove anything. Meanwhile, Paul's violence crept into his relationship with Karla. He berated her for not being a virgin, blamed her for his frustrations, and demanded more and more from her. Karla, desperate to keep his love, agreed to his darkest wish, a gift that would become one of the most shocking crimes in Canadian history. Tammy Homolka was Karla's little sister, just 15, with dreams of becoming a teacher, beloved by her family and friends. As Christmas approached in 1990, Paul told Karla he wanted Tammy as his present. On December 23rd, while their parents slept upstairs, Karla crushed animal tranquilizers stolen from her veterinary clinic into a drink and gave it to Tammy. The girl quickly lost consciousness. Paul and Karla raped her together. At some point, Tammy began choking and stopped breathing. Panic set in. Karla and Paul frantically tried to clean her, dress her, and move her to her bed. They called for help and sobbed as paramedics arrived. But Tammy was already gone. Her parents were shattered. The police saw only a tragic accident. Alcohol poisoning, maybe an allergic reaction. No one imagined the truth, that Karla had helped end her own sister's life. Karla wore Tammy's clothes for months, even dyed her hair the same shade of blonde. Paul demanded it. Their wedding went ahead as planned, despite the empty seat at the table. but their hunger for cruelty was not satisfied. Over the next 2 years, Paul and Karla stalked, abducted, and tortured more young women. In June 1991, Leslie Mahaffey, a bright and popular 14-year-old, was locked out of her house after missing curfew. Paul found her walking alone and lured her into his car. She was held captive for days in Paul and Karla's home. They videotaped her suffering, forcing her to call Paul master and Karla ma'am. When they were finished, they murdered Leslie, dismembered her body, and encased her remains in concrete, dumping them in a nearby lake. The Mahaffey family's grief was endless. Leslie's mother, in a televised interview, held back tears and said, "I keep waiting for her to walk through the door. Some days I forget for a moment that she's gone, and then it all comes rushing back." Less than a year later, Kristen French, a dedicated student and talented athlete, was walking home from school. Paul and Karla, posing as a couple asking for directions, forced Kristen into their car at knife point. Over Easter weekend, Kristen endured 3 days of unspeakable horror, beaten, assaulted, and tormented. Karla appeared on the tapes offering Kristen food and comfort, then joining in the abuse. After they killed Kristen, Paul and Karla went to Karla's family Easter dinner as if nothing had happened. Kristen's parents and friends searched desperately. Her face was on every telephone pole, news report, and store window in the region. Her father later said, "We left her Easter basket on the table, thinking she'd be home any minute." The French family founded a charity in Kristen's name, determined that her spirit would not be forgotten. Meanwhile, police struggled. Paul had been questioned and even provided a DNA sample, but it was never tested in time. Reports came in from friends, neighbors, and co-workers describing Paul's violent temper and his resemblance to the Scarborough rapist's sketch. Still, the connection was missed. Bureaucracy, inexperience, and chance left the killer free. Paul's abuse turned more and more toward Karla. In January 1993, after a savage beating that left her hospitalized, Karla finally told her parents the truth, or at least a version of it. She claimed she was a battered wife, forced to take part in Paul's crimes. Police were eager for a conviction, and they offered her a deal: 12 years in prison for full testimony against Paul. Only after the deal was struck did the most damning evidence emerge: videotapes hidden in a light fixture showing Karla as not just a victim, but an active, even enthusiastic participant. On tape, she smiled, joked, and sometimes comforted the girls, only to then participate in their torture. Paul's trial was a national sensation. The tapes were shown only to the jury, police, and lawyers. Reporters who heard the testimony described it as inhuman, evil in its purest form. In the gallery, parents sobbed, jurors wept, and even police officers left the room, shaken and sickened. Paul Bernardo was convicted of first-degree murder, sexual assault, and other crimes. He was declared a dangerous offender, ensuring he would never be released. He has since been denied parole multiple times. Karla Homolka served her time in a women's prison, sometimes volunteering in the nursery and library, before being quietly released in 2005. She changed her name, married, and had children of her own. News of her living in Montreal and later Quebec sent waves of outrage through every community she tried to join. The survivors of Paul Bernardo's attacks, those who lived through the Scarborough rapist years, carry the scars forever. One woman, now in her 40s, wrote, "I built a wall around my life after what he did to me. I lost my sense of safety. Even now, when I hear footsteps behind me, I freeze." The families of Leslie, Kristen, Tammy, and Jane Doe, a survivor whose real name remains protected, have become activists. They demand justice for victims, reform of the parole system, and better support for those left behind. The Mahaffey and French families attend parole hearings, making sure their daughters' voices are never forgotten. They hold candlelight vigils, speak to students about safety, and work to ensure that no one else has to suffer as they did. Police and prosecutors, too, were changed by this case. It exposed fatal flaws in evidence processing, victim support, and interagency communication. Afterward, reforms were put in place. DNA databases were expanded, missing persons investigations were prioritized, and new training programs were created for handling sexual violence cases. But the hardest lessons came at a terrible cost. Many believe the deal with Karla was the worst mistake in Canadian legal history. The public outcry was immense. How could someone so involved serve so little time? How could a woman who drugged and killed her own sister walk free, start a new life, and have children? But what happened after the courtrooms emptied? After the television trucks left the streets of St. Catharines? After the headlines faded from the front pages? The echoes of this case, its pain, its questions, its unfinished justice, continue to ripple through Canadian society to this day. To understand the true legacy of the Ken and Barbie killers, we must look deeper, beyond the surface of horror, into the countless lives their crimes altered forever. In the years that followed the trial, the families of Leslie, Kristen, and Tammy gathered quietly, trying to rebuild lives shattered by violence. Each anniversary brought a new wave of grief. At Leslie Mahaffey's old school, classmates planted a tree in her memory, and every spring the pink blossoms would remind her friends of the girl who should have been walking with them down graduation aisle, laughing in the halls, dreaming of the future. Her mother, Deborah Mahaffey, spoke in interviews of sleepless nights and silent mornings, of the ache that never left. "There's a space at the table that can't be filled," she said. "There are birthdays that go uncelebrated, holidays that feel hollow." Kristen French's parents, Doug and Donna, became activists for victims' rights. They founded the Kristen French Child Advocacy Center in Niagara, providing support to children who had suffered trauma and violence. Doug French, who passed away in 2010, once said, "Every day we choose whether to be defined by our grief or our love. We choose to keep Kristen's light alive by helping others." For Jane Doe, the young woman whose identity remains protected, the aftermath of survival was as complex as the crime itself. In a rare, anonymous interview years later, she revealed, "I struggled with trust, with anger, with shame that wasn't mine to carry. But over time, I found my voice. I spoke out. I helped others. I refused to let them take my life, too." The ripple effects extended far beyond the families and survivors. Neighbors, friends, teachers, and police officers who were touched by the case found their own lives changed. Many first responders who viewed the evidence or searched for remains developed post-traumatic stress. One officer who asked not to be named told a reporter, "I've seen a lot of bad things, but those tapes, they haunt you. I hear the voices in my dreams. You don't ever really let go." In universities, law schools, and police academies across Canada, the case became a textbook example of both the darkest corners of human nature and the dangerous consequences of institutional failure. Students pored over the mistakes in evidence handling, the missed opportunities to catch Paul Bernardo sooner, the ethical quandaries raised by Karla Homolka's plea bargain. One of the most searing debates that emerged in the aftermath was about Karla herself. Was she a victim or a villain? Some psychologists argued she had been manipulated and terrorized, her will broken by Paul's abuse. Others pointed to the tapes and her own words, the chilling lack of remorse, her calm participation in the acts. A journalist once asked, "Can anyone truly know what evil is capable of until it's unmasked?" The answer, in the end, remains elusive, a shadow at the edge of understanding. Even years later, Karla Homolka's presence continued to spark outrage wherever she went. When it was revealed she had married, changed her name, and was living quietly in Quebec, communities erupted. Parents demanded to know how someone with such a past could be allowed to work in schools, to raise children. In 2016, news broke that she was volunteering at her children's elementary school in Montreal. The backlash was immediate and fierce: protests, petitions, heated town hall meetings. The fear and anger were not just about Karla's freedom, but about the feeling that the justice system had failed, that closure was impossible. Meanwhile, Paul Bernardo remained behind bars, denied parole again and again. At every hearing, the Thous, families of Leslie and Kristen appeared, their voices unwavering. In 2018 and again in 2021, they faced Paul in the parole boardroom. He was older now, grayer, but as emotionless as ever. "He didn't look at us," one family member recalled. "He never apologized. I don't think he ever will." In his statements, Bernardo continued to insist he was a changed man, but the parole board found his words empty, his risk too great. He remains, and likely always will remain, in a maximum security prison. For Canadian law enforcement and legal scholars, the case of Bernardo and Homolka became a catalyst for reform. The failures in DNA evidence processing led to the establishment of a national DNA databank. Police protocols for missing persons cases were overhauled. Victim support services were expanded. Parole board procedures were made more transparent. Yet, as many advocates point out, these changes came only after the worst possible price. The cultural legacy of the Ken and Barbie Killers also lives on in art, media, and popular culture. The case inspired books, documentaries, films, and endless debate. Some works focused on the psychology of the killers, others on the anguish of the families, still others on the broader questions of justice, gender, and evil. Each new retelling sparked fresh controversy. Was it right to make films about such suffering? Did it help or harm to keep these wounds open in the public eye? For survivors and advocates, the answer is complicated. On one hand, repeated media attention can be a painful reminder. On the other, forgetting is a luxury the victims do not have. As one activist, a survivor of childhood abuse herself, said, "Silence is the friend of predators. When we talk, when we remember, we make it harder for evil to hide." The story of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka also changed the way Canadians thought about the face of danger. For generations, people had taught their children to be wary of strangers, to fear the unknown. But here, the killers were beautiful, clean-cut and educated. They went to work, attended family dinners, blended into the fabric of their communities. They could have been anyone. This realization shattered the illusion of safety, forcing a national reckoning with the uncomfortable truth that evil is not always elsewhere. It can grow in the heart of the ordinary. This reckoning led to difficult conversations, not just about criminal justice, but about domestic abuse, coercion, and complicity. Women who had survived abusive relationships came forward to share their own stories, breaking silences that had lasted years. Men questioned the cultural messages about power, entitlement, and control. Parents became more vigilant, teachers more aware, communities more united in the determination to protect their most vulnerable members. In schools across Ontario, students still learn the names Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, not as cautionary tales, but as reminders of the need for empathy, courage, and solidarity. Youth programs created in their memory help children recognize the signs of abuse, encourage open communication, and provide safe spaces for those in crisis. The advocacy centers founded in their names continue to offer counseling, legal aid, and a path toward healing for countless families. Every year, on the anniversaries of their deaths, candles are lit and prayers are offered in churches, community centers, and family homes. The ceremonies are quiet but powerful, a testament to the enduring love that survives even the greatest loss. At one such gathering, a friend of Kristen French read a poem she had written in high school, her voice trembling but clear. "Hope is a candle that never dies, even in the darkest night." The room was silent, except for the sound of quiet, weeping. In quieter ways, the victims' legacies live on. Scholarships were established in their names, funding the dreams of young people who want to make the world a safer, kinder place. Memorial gardens bloom every spring, their flowers a symbol of resilience and renewal. Families who once suffered in isolation now support each other, forming bonds that transcend tragedy. For the survivors of Paul Bernardo's assaults, the journey is ongoing. Some found solace in advocacy, speaking out about sexual violence, working to reform the systems that failed them. Others chose privacy, focusing on personal healing, rebuilding relationships, learning to trust again. For all of them, the shadow of the past remains, but so does the strength that carried them through. 1. Survivor speaking at a university forum said, "Survival isn't just about living through the moment. It's about finding a way to live beyond it, to reclaim what was taken, to choose life, again and again." Her words resonated with others in the room, some of whom had their own stories of pain and survival. In the years since, she has become a mentor to others, a beacon of hope and resilience. For the professionals who worked on the case, police officers, prosecutors, counselors, the legacy is complicated. Some retired early, unable to continue after witnessing such darkness. Others devoted their careers to improving the justice system, training new generations in the lessons learned from the failures and the courage shown in the Bernardo case. One retired detective wrote a memoir, dedicating it to the families who taught me the true meaning of grace under fire. Even now, decades later, new information continues to surface. Investigative journalists file freedom of information requests, unearthing old files, lost interviews, missed warnings. Each discovery is a reminder of the complexity and persistence of evil, but also of the human capacity to seek truth, even when it hurts. The story of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka is not just about horror, but about the struggle for justice, the power of memory, and the resilience of those who refuse to be defined by tragedy. It is a warning, yes, but also a call to action, to protect, to speak out, to hold institutions accountable, and to honor the dignity of every life touched by violence. It's easy to look back and wonder, could things have been different? If police had processed the DNA faster, if tips had been followed up, if friends and family had spoken out sooner, would Leslie, Kristen, and Tammy still be alive? These questions linger in the minds of all who were touched by the case. They are not questions with easy answers, but they are necessary ones. Ultimately, the Ken and Barbie Killers case is a testament to both the darkness and the light within humanity. It shows us the worst that people are capable of, but also the best, the courage of survivors, the dedication of advocates, the love of families, the resolve of a community that refuses to forget. For every act of cruelty, there were 10 of kindness. Neighbors who cooked meals for grieving families, strangers who donated to memorial funds, teachers who listened to students' fears, counselors who helped survivors find their voices again. In the face of unimaginable loss, the response was a chorus of care. If you have been affected by this story or by violence in your own life, know that you are not alone. Help is available. Support can be found in advocacy groups, counseling, centers, hotlines, and the solidarity of others who have walked a similar path. Healing is not easy, but it is possible. As we remember the victims and honor their stories, let us also commit to building a world where such evil is never allowed to flourish again. Let us teach our children to recognize warning signs, to value empathy, to reach out for help when needed. Let us hold our leaders accountable for protecting the most vulnerable among us, and let us never be complacent in the face of injustice. In the end, the most important lesson of the Ken and Barbie Killers case is this: love endures. Even in the darkest times, even when justice seems out of reach, The memory of those lost inspires us to fight for a better future. Their stories remind us to hold our loved ones close, to cherish every moment, and to never, ever give up hope. So as the years pass and the details of the case fade from the headlines, let us keep alive the memories of Leslie, Kristen, Tammy, Jane Doe, and all those whose lives were forever changed. Let us speak their names, tell their stories, and strive every day to be worthy of the courage and resilience they showed. Because in the end, that is the truest victory over evil. Not forgetting, not giving in to fear, but choosing, again and again, to stand on the side of light. If you found this story important, please consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep the memory of the victims alive and make sure their stories and their strength are never forgotten. Evil may sometimes win a battle, but it never wins in the end, so long as we remember, reflect, and demand better for those we have lost. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, and always trust your instincts.